In 2021, a team of physicists published something quietly strange in Nature Communications. They showed, mathematically, that the familiar ticking of time can be pulled out of a completely frozen quantum state, a state that from the outside never changes at all. Time, in their model, wasn't the engine. It was something that showed up when one part of a system compared itself to another part, a relationship, keeping the books. Now hold that thought, and think back to a Wednesday night somewhere around 2008. Maybe you were on the couch with somebody you loved. Maybe you had a bowl of popcorn going, and a show called Lost was quietly breaking every rule about how television is supposed to handle time. Flashbacks, flash forwards, a man named Desmond coming unstuck from his own life. And here's the thing most of us missed while we were arguing about the smoke monster. Every single time that show needed to save somebody from time itself, it never reached for a clock. It reached for a person. So tonight on the Jackdaw Patio, we're asking a question that sounds simple and gets stranger the longer you sit with it. What if time is not the thing reality runs on? What if relationships are the deeper structure, and time is just the name our minds give to the ordering of changed relationships? And one promise before we start: everything tonight is offered as a lens. Live, debated research, and honest interpretation, never settled proof. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why serious physicists lose sleep over something called the problem of time, why your own brain may be filing change rather than counting seconds, and why the most romantic episode of television ever made, The Constant, might accidentally be the best physics lesson of the decade. And you'll walk away with one simple test you can run on your own memory this week. This matters to you because you already live it. You know a 5-minute wait in a hospital hallway that lasted a year. You know a decade that vanished the moment an old friend called your name across a parking lot. Your clock and your life have never quite agreed. Tonight we ask whether the clock was ever really the equation at all. I'm Chris. Pull up a chair on the patio. Lily, Charlie, and Dr. Vega are already arguing about it. Before we hand this to the panel, let me set the table. Chapter 1 is about a crack running down the middle of physics, a crack most people have never heard of, called the problem of time. Einstein's relativity treats time one way. Quantum mechanics treats it another way entirely. And when you try to put the two together, in black holes or the early universe, the mathematics starts asking an uncomfortable question. What if time was never fundamental to begin with? That question is older than physics. Aristotle asked it, Leibniz asked it, and tonight, 3 friends on a patio are going to ask it again, starting with the most ordinary object in your house, the clock on your wall.
Right then, I'll open with a confession. I taught school for over 30 years, and every classroom I ever stood in had a clock on the wall, and I don't believe I ever once trusted it. That last hour before the holidays, dear, that clock lied. It crawled. And the good lessons, the ones where the whole room leaned in, gone in a blink. So when Chris tells me some philosophers reckon time isn't a river at all, that it might just be the pattern left in the silt, well, blast me. I've suspected that since 1970-something.
See, and I love you for that, Lil, but I'm going to be the bloke who defends the clock. I spent 40 years as a photojournalist. My whole career was timestamps. Catch the light at golden hour. File the story by deadline. Don't miss the flight. The clock worked, mate, every single day. So if some philosopher wants to tell me time doesn't exist, I'd like to see him explain that to my old editor in Sydney at 5 to deadline.
Actually, Charlie, nobody serious is saying your clock doesn't work. That's the straw man version. Here's the real version. A clock is just a physical system that changes in a very reliable, very boring way. A pendulum swings. A quartz crystal vibrates. A cesium atom does its little cesium thing. When you check your watch, you are not measuring some cosmic substance called time. You are comparing one change, the crystal, against another change, your flight boarding. The question philosophers and physicists actually argue about is whether there's anything underneath those comparisons. Whether time is a container things happen inside of, or just the comparison itself.
And that's the old quarrel, isn't it? Newton on one side saying time flows on its own, equably, whether anything happens or not. And Leibniz on the other saying, no, time is nothing but the order of events. Take away the events, and there's no time left over. Aristotle was there first, mind. He said time is the number of change. No change, no number.
Hang on. So Leibniz reckons if the whole universe froze, every atom, every photon, everything, no time would pass at all? Not even a little bit.
That's the relationist claim, yes. And before you laugh, consider that a frozen universe with time passing and a frozen universe with no time passing are observationally identical. There is no experiment, even in principle, that tells them apart, which should make the hair on your neck stand up a little.
Bit of a rum deal for the clock industry.
Oh, the clocks are fine, dear. It's the clockmaker's philosophy that's in trouble.
And here's where it stops being a parlor game. In the 20th century, this quarrel crashed into real physics. General relativity, Einstein's theory, treats time as flexible, woven into space, bent by mass, with no universal now. Quantum mechanics treats time as a rigid external parameter, a fixed backdrop the wave function evolves against. Those two pictures are incompatible. And in the regimes where you need both theories at once, inside black holes, at the first instant of the universe, the incompatibility becomes what researchers call the problem of time. There's a well-known review by Edward Anderson that describes it as not one problem, but a whole bundle of them. And I want to be precise here, because this is a patio, not a tent revival. None of this proves time is unreal. It proves that the status of time is genuinely unresolved at the deepest level of physics. Those are different claims, and mainstream physics has not settled the matter.
And that unresolved status is exactly the opening. Because in the Eden framework, and I'll own it, this is my work, so take it as a lens and not a verdict, the suggestion is that time isn't the first variable. Openness narrowing into one lived path is the first thing. Time is the trail that narrowing leaves behind. The serpent's visible track, not necessarily the serpent's body.
Okay, that I can picture. I've photographed snake tracks in the outback. The track tells you something came through. It doesn't tell you what the animal was.
Oh, that's rather lovely, Charlie. You do have your moments, you know. Rare as hen's teeth, but you have them.
He's going to think you meant the snake, Lily. He always thinks you mean the snake.
What else would she mean?
Nothing, Charlie. Nothing at all. Moving on.
So here's where Chapter 1 leaves us. The clock on your wall works perfectly, and it might still be hiding something. If time is a comparison rather than a container, then the obvious next question is, a comparison between what and what? And that question has an answer, and the answer is going to sound like a love story, because in 1983, two physicists named Don Page and William Wootters proposed that time itself might emerge from something quantum mechanics calls entanglement, a correlation between two systems. Stay with us. Chapter 2 is where the clock meets its partner. Chapter 2. This is the deep end of the pool, but I promise you the water's warm. We're going to look at 3 live research programs, and I want to stress live, debated, unfinished, that all point the same direction. Relation might come before sequence. First, the Page-Wootters mechanism, where time emerges from correlation. Second, relational quantum mechanics, where things don't fully exist alone, only in interaction. Third, causal set theory, where the geometry of space-time itself might be built from nothing but order relations. 3 different doors, same hallway. Let's walk it.
All right, Page and Wootters, 1983. Here's the setup. No equations required. Imagine the entire universe as one quantum state that, globally, does not change. Frozen. Now divide it into 2 entangled pieces. Call one piece the clock, and call the other piece everything else. Here's the trick. An observer inside the system who reads the clock piece and asks what everything else looks like when the clock says 3, then 4, then 5. That observer sees evolution, motion, history, time. But a godlike observer outside, looking at the whole thing at once, sees a static state, nothing happening, ever.
That can't be right. How can it be moving and frozen at the same time?
Because moving is a relational statement. There was an experiment by Moreva and colleagues, a tabletop illustration with entangled photons, showing exactly this. The internal view, conditioned on the clock, shows evolution. The global view, shows a stationary state. And a later paper by Fody and colleagues in Nature Communications derived familiar quantum and even classical motion out of nothing but that clock system entanglement. Now, boundary flag. Because I'm contractually obligated, this does not prove time is an illusion, and it does not solve quantum gravity. It shows that time can be modeled as emerging from correlation. Modeled as. Some researchers speculate it goes deeper. The jury is not just out, the jury hasn't been seated.
But do you hear what he's actually saying, Charlie? The clock does not create time. The clock gives the system a way to compare itself to something else. Time comes out of the relationship. And I must say that's the oldest story I know. The Aboriginal Dreamtime isn't a calendar. It's a web of kinship between people and country. The Norse wove fate as threads crossing threads. Even in Genesis, love. The days don't get counted until after the separating starts. Light from dark, waters from waters. First the relations, then the sequence.
Fair dinkum though, Lil. Every culture also invented calendars. Farmers needed to know when to plant. Sailors needed tides. If relation is so fundamental, why does everybody keep building clocks?
Because the receipt is useful, dear. Nobody's saying burn the receipts. We're asking what the purchase was.
And that instinct, that a thing isn't fully described alone, has a formal cousin called relational quantum mechanics, from Carlo Rovelli. The claim, roughly, physical quantities don't have absolute values sitting there, whether or not anyone interacts. Values get actualized in interactions, relative to another system. Facts are relational, and in the interest of honesty, this interpretation is actively debated. There are published critiques arguing the relative facts idea runs into consistency problems, and there are published replies. It is a live research program, not orthodoxy, which frankly is the fun part. Settled science makes terrible patio conversation.
Third door, causal sets. And this one is my personal favorite because it's the most radical and the most humble at the same time. Causal set theory throws away smooth space-time and replaces it with a huge collection of discrete events connected by nothing but order relations. This came before that. The slogan, from Raphael Sorkin, is order plus number equals geometry. Count the events, respect the ordering, and space-time shape comes back out. If anything like that is right, then the deep structure of reality isn't a stage, it's a family tree. And this isn't fringe. There's a Royal Society meeting on causal sets scheduled for this September in Manchester. Contested, unfinished, but very much on the grown-ups table.
So, let me play the man at the pub. Physicists call it entanglement, and Lily's lot would call it, what, some great web of being? Am I anywhere close?
Close enough for a photojournalist, dear. The web of being, the great weave, the song lines. Psychologists might say the collective unconscious. Pick your dialect. Everyone's pointing at connection underneath sequence.
And I'll allow the poetry with one asterisk the size of Norwich. Those are metaphorical rhymes, not evidence. The physics stands on its own or not at all. But as a thought experiment, reality is a code where the syntax is relationships and time is just the line numbers. That's not the worst compression of causal set theory I've ever heard. Information theory people would say, the line numbers aren't the program. The dependencies are the program.
You know what this reminds me of? Developing film. You'd come back from 3 weeks in the field with 40 rolls, all out of order, no dates on anything. And you'd reconstruct the whole trip not from timestamps, from relationships. This face was at that wedding. That storm came before this flood because the bridge is still standing in the background. The order was in the picture's relations to each other, not in some clock.
Charlie, that might be the most beautiful thing you've ever said on this patio. 40 rolls of film, and the story was in how the faces connected.
Well, it was mostly about the bridge, but thanks, Lil.
And there it is, folks. She hands him the web of being. He gives her infrastructure. This is chapter 4 foreshadowing, by the way. Somebody on this patio is going to need a constant.
So we've got physics whispering that relation might precede sequence. But there's a piece of hardware much closer to home that's been running that experiment your whole life. The 3 pounds of wet electricity behind your eyes. Chapter 3. Your brain doesn't keep time. Your brain files change, and once you see how, you can never unsee it. Chapter 3 brings this down out of the black holes and into your kitchen. Cognitive science has spent 2 decades mapping how human beings actually experience time, and the answer is not a smooth inner clock. The answer is segmentation, the mind chopping the continuous flow of life into events, filing them by boundaries, and indexing memory by relational context. This is the best supported science in tonight's whole episode, and it's also where I get to hand you the one concrete test we promised in the intro. Panel, take it away.
Okay, so this part is not speculative, which is a nice change of pace for this show. Event segmentation theory, Kirby and Zacks is the classic review, says perception doesn't stream experience like raw video. Your brain automatically cuts life into events at multiple scales. Dinner. Within dinner, cooking, eating, cleaning up. Within cooking, chopping the onion. The cuts happen at boundaries, moments when what's happening changes enough that your brain's predictions break and it opens a new file. And here's the wild part. Your later sense of how long something took tracks the number of files, not the number of seconds.
Which every teacher on Earth could have told you for free, dear. The lessons the children remembered as long weren't the ones that ran long. They were the ones with the most happenings in them.
Right, and the neuroscience underneath it is genuinely elegant. There are neurons in the hippocampus. McDonald and colleagues called them time cells that fire in sequence to bridge gaps between events, stitching moments together. Human studies show hippocampal neurons tracking positions in a structured sequence of experiences. And Baldessano's group showed that when people watch a movie, their brains mark the big narrative boundaries, and hippocampal activity at those boundaries predicts what gets remembered later. The brain isn't counting, it's filing. Sequence memory is relational context all the way down.
That explains something that used to spook me, actually. Ask me what I did in 1994, and I've got nothing. Ask me where I was when I shot the photo of the fisherman with the scar, and suddenly it's all there. The monsoon, the smell of diesel, what came before, what came after. The memory isn't stored under a date, it's stored under a face.
Under a relationship, Charlie. The face is a relationship. And isn't that just how grief works too? You don't miss someone by the calendar. You miss them at the boundaries. First morning coffee, the empty chair at Sunday lunch. The mind doesn't file the loss under a date. It files it under every relation the person used to hold up.
And that's the bridge back to the Eden lens. If the mind experiences time as filed relational change, then subjective time is downstream of structure. In Eden language, relationship and constraint come first. The state you're in lives inside those relations. Collapse, the narrowing of what's possible into what actually happens, gets recorded. And time is the ordering label consciousness sticks on the record afterward. Relationship, state, collapse, time label, in that order. Now, the test we promised. Vega, give them the homework.
Here's your one crisp, measurable proxy, and you can literally run it at your next dinner party. Take a 10-minute film clip, have half your guests watch it, and simply mark, on paper, every moment they feel one thing has ended and another has begun. The boundaries. Have the other half watch it, and then estimate from memory how long it ran and how long each part felt. The prediction from event segmentation research. The felt durations will track the boundary counts far better than they track the actual clock. More boundaries, more felt time. Fewer boundaries, time vanishes. That's falsifiable at the scale of your living room. If everybody's duration estimates track the stopwatch instead, the theory took a hit on your sofa. That's how this is supposed to work.
And that's why the drive home always feels shorter than the drive out. Fewer new files on the way back.
And why the last 30 years went faster than my 20s, more's the pity. Though here's what I'd love to know from everyone watching, and do put it in the comments because I genuinely collect these. Think of one memory you can walk around inside, really inhabit. Now ask yourself, is it filed under a date? Or is it filed under a person? I'd wager a pot of tea it's a person. Mine is. It's a classroom in Norwich in the autumn, and it isn't the year I remember. It's a particular child finally reading a whole page out loud, and the way the room went quiet for her.
Mine's a dark room, since you ask. And here's a thing our younger viewers may not believe. We used to hold time in our hands. Shoeboxes of photographs. Mixtapes, where the order of the songs was the message. You'd flip through an album and the sequence was physical. This page, then this page. Now it's 4,000 photos on a phone sorted by an algorithm. And I reckon half the reason the years blur is we stopped doing the filing ourselves.
That's anecdote, not data, Charlie. But it's a testable anecdote, which I respect. Whether outsourcing memory to devices changes how we segment and recall experience is a real open research question. Some researchers speculate it does. Consider that homework, part 2.
Well, there's the answer then, isn't it? To why the years run faster the older we get. Fewer boundaries. When you're young, everything's a first. First kiss, first classroom, first proper heartbreak, and the mind's opening a new file every week of it. By my age, the days slide along on rails, all filed under same as yesterday, dear. 60-odd years of living, and I'd swear the last 10 fit in a smaller shoebox than my 20s did. Blast, that's a bit bleak. Said out loud, isn't it?
Careful, Lily. You'll depress the demographic. Quick standard issue reality check while I'm here. Everything in this chapter about brains is solid, mainstream research. The Eden framing around it is an interpretive lens, Chris's lens, and we are not offering anybody medical advice about memory. If your memory's genuinely worrying you, that's a conversation for an actual doctor, not 4 people on a patio with beverages.
So the physics says relation might precede sequence, and the neuroscience says your experience of time is built from filed relational change, which means we're finally ready for the main event. Because 20 years ago, a network television show built an entire mythology on exactly this idea, possibly by accident, and buried it under a smoke monster and a polar bear. Chapter 4, The Island, and the single greatest hour of television about what a person actually needs when time stops working. If you were anywhere near a television between 2004 and 2010, you remember the arguments. What is the island? Purgatory? A time machine? An experiment? Tonight I want to offer a different reading, not a claim about what the writers intended, just a lens. What if the island is best understood not as a place that breaks time, but as a structure that exposes relationships? Every crash survivor arrives carrying an unresolved relation, a father, a betrayal, a debt, a guilt. And the island, whatever it is, seems to organize everything around those knots. In Eden terms, the island behaves like an active constraint structure, the thing that decides which paths are open and which identities get forced to the surface. And nowhere is that clearer than in 1 hour of television from 2008 called The Constant.
Can I just say, as the resident skeptic, Lost drove me mental. I was on assignment half those years, watching episodes weeks late on burned DVDs. But The Constant, mate. I watched that one in a hotel in Jakarta, and I'm not ashamed to say it got dusty in that room. Desmond's consciousness comes unstuck. He's bouncing between 1996 and 2004, and the bouncing is killing him. And the fix isn't a machine. The physicist character Faraday tells him he needs a constant. Something, someone that exists in both times that he cares about, to anchor him.
Penny. He calls Penny. 8 years of silence, and she kept the same number because she was looking for him too. And he says, "Oh, I shan't do the whole speech. I'll go to pieces." He says he won't give up. And that phone call stitches the man back together. Not a date, not a coordinate, a person who holds him in both worlds at once.
And there's a detail I'd forgotten till Chris put it in the research pack. At the end of that hour, Faraday, the physicist, digs out his old journal from 1996, and there's a line he wrote to himself years before. "If anything goes wrong, Desmond Hume will be my constant." The scientist's own insurance policy against time failing wasn't an equation in that notebook. It was a name.
A name in a notebook. Blast, that's the whole episode in 5 words, isn't it? And can I say something about how we watched it too? Because that mattered. 2008, you watched it Thursday night or you missed it. And Friday morning, the whole staff room was talking about one phone call. Appointment television. The show about people needing to share the same moment was itself a shared moment. We've rather lost that, streaming everything alone at midnight.
The water cooler era. Even in a press tent in Jakarta, somebody had a bootleg and 12 of us crowded round a laptop. Shared time. Funny old thing to be nostalgic for, synchronization.
And here, reluctantly, because it's almost too neat, is where the physics metaphor actually earns its keep. Remember Page-Wootters from Chapter 2? Time emerges when a system is correlated with a clock, a stable reference that lets it order its own states. Desmond's problem is that his ordinary temporal indexing has failed. His states won't order. And what fixes it is a stable correlation that exists across both of his moments. Penny is functioning structurally as his clock subsystem, his reference frame. Metaphor, not mechanism. The show is not doing quantum information theory, and I will personally refund your patio admission if anyone claims otherwise. But as a structural rhyme, it's almost embarrassingly exact. Desmond does not survive by finding the right year. He survives by finding the right relation.
And once you've got that lens, the whole show reorganizes. The flashbacks aren't just backstory, they're the record of how each identity hardened, how the collapse already happened. The flash forwards are the paths the island made likely. Whatever happened, happened. That's path dependence. The show saying out loud that once possibility collapses, you don't get it back, you carry it. The characters were never really trapped in time.
They were trapped in consequences.
Yes, which I'm sorry to report is what most people mean by time after age 30 anyway.
You know what I think though, truly? Every myth of return I've ever collected for the book, Odysseus, Persephone, the prodigal, they all pretend to be about time. Years away, seasons turning. But the payload is never the years. It's the recognition. Somebody knows you when you come back. The dog knows Odysseus before the wife does. Maybe every myth about return is really a myth about time giving up and relationship taking over.
The book's going to be a ripper, Lil. That line's going in it, I hope.
It might, dear. Though I'll tell you a secret, everyone needs a constant, Charlie. Something in both times. Some of us have known what ours is for years now. We're just waiting on a certain party to pick up the telephone.
Yeah, phone service out here's shocking though. Half my calls drop on the back patio.
And there it goes. Ladies and gentlemen, 8 years Penny waited by that phone, and she had it easy. Charlie, I want you to know that somewhere, Desmond Hume is watching this and weeping for you.
From my phone service? Decent of him.
Sure, for the phone service.
One thread left, because Lost didn't end with a rescue or a battle. It ended in a church, in a sideways world that fans argued about for years. And if tonight's lens holds, that ending isn't a cop-out at all. It might be the most honest thing the show ever did. Chapter 5. What happens when the record is complete and time isn't needed anymore? And what an old story about a garden might have been trying to say all along. Final chapter. The Flash Sideways. Season 6 shows us what looks like an alternate world. The plane never crashed. Everyone got their life back. And then the finale reveals it's something else. A place the characters made together, outside ordinary chronology, to find one another before moving on. Half the audience felt cheated. They wanted the timeline resolved. But look through tonight's lens and the ending is saying something precise. Chronology was never the thing that needed resolving. The relationships were. And I'll close this chapter by bringing it home to the oldest garden story we have, and to why I think the Eden lens has been pointing here all night.
The church scene. Everyone gathered, everyone remembering. And the remembering, dear, that's what got me. In the sideways world, each of them wakes up not by checking a calendar, but by touching a person. Sun and Jin at the ultrasound. Sawyer and Juliet at the vending machine of all the blessed places. The past doesn't come back as dates. It comes back as recognition. The scattered pieces finding one another.
I'll be honest. When it aired, I was in the cheated camp. Felt like the writers waved a hand at every mystery. But I'll grant this much. Thinking of it as a sorting room instead of a timeline, it plays completely differently. It's not where did they end up, it's who did they still owe. Everyone in that room had unfinished relational business, and the sideways is where the business finishes. Even a skeptic can see the show was never about the island coordinates. My whole career, the photo that mattered was never the landscape, it was the faces.
And notice the mechanics of it, because I think this is where the writers were cleverer than they get credit for. Nobody in the sideways wakes up by being told the truth. Ben tries telling, and it doesn't take. They wake by touch, by recognition. The old traditions would call it gnosis, dear. Knowledge you don't learn but remember. The Gnostics had this lovely idea of the spark that forgets where it came from and has to be gathered home. Whether or not one takes any of that literally, and I hold it lightly, mind, the finale is staging it almost beat for beat, remembering as homecoming.
Complex systems. People have unglamorous language for the same shape, if you'd like the secular hymn. Phase transition. Water molecules jostle around individually. That's your ordinary chronology. Everyone on their own clock, colliding. Then conditions complete, and the whole system snaps into a new, ordered phase, all at once, collectively. Ice doesn't freeze one molecule at a time in sequence. The transition is a property of the relationships across the whole system. The church scene reads like a system completing a phase transition. Sequence gives way to configuration. And structurally, that reading is cleaner than the alternate timeline reading, which never made internal sense anyway. Call it a relational completion space. Ordinary time is the index of ongoing collapse. Possibilities still narrowing. Records still being written. The sideways is what you get when the narrowing is done. Nothing left to collapse. So the index goes quiet. When relationship completes, time becomes unnecessary. That's not physics. To be extremely clear, that's the Eden lens fully deployed as interpretation, and it should be scored as such. But as interpretation, it explains why the finale feels like rest rather than resolution. Also, one aside, because Chris will never say it himself, in his day job building software governance systems, there's a principle that the log file doesn't cause the system. Timestamps are metadata. The architecture, the permissions, the constraints, the relationships between components. That's what actually decides what can happen. Time is the timestamp. Structure is the system. The finale is what a system looks like when there's nothing left to log.
I'll allow it. And here's my closing thought for the chapter, and I want to be careful with it. Right now, if you go looking online, Eden is having a moment. There are viral videos claiming the garden was an ancient laboratory, or that it's under the Persian Gulf, 4 rivers converging on sonar. That's not what we're doing here. The Eden hypothesis was never a dig site. It's a description, a proposed lens for how open possibility narrows into one lived, remembered path. And in that reading, the garden story is a story about time itself. Unity on one side of the gate, everything still possible, no sequence yet. Then a choice, a narrowing, a collapse, and suddenly there's before and after, exile and distance, a trail behind you. The fall is the entry into sequence, and every return story ever told, Odysseus, the prodigal, Desmond's phone call, a church full of people who finally remember each other, is the same homesickness. Not for a place, but for the state where relationship was whole and the clock had nothing to do.
Not the erasing of the story, mind. The gathering up of it. You don't get Eden back by rewinding. You get it back by completing. And that's my question for everyone at home tonight, and I do want your answers. What's your unfinished sentence? Not your regret, your incomplete relation. The one the sideways room would be holding for you. You needn't tell us who. Just tell us it exists. That's participation enough.
And you don't need a smoke monster for that. Most of us have got a phone call we've been putting off.
Look at that. Charlie lands the emotional thesis of the entire episode and has absolutely no idea which phone call we all think he means. Perfect. No notes. Chris, Wrap it up before I start believing things.
Let's gather up the trail we just left. We started with a crack in physics, the problem of time, where relativity and quantum mechanics can't agree on what a clock even is, and where a family of serious, unfinished ideas keeps suggesting the same heresy, that relation might come before sequence. Page and Wootters showing time can be modeled as emerging from correlation between a clock and a system. Ravelli's relational quantum mechanics arguing that things get their properties in interaction, not in isolation. Causal sets proposing that space-time geometry itself might be built from nothing but order relations. Order plus number equals geometry. None of it settled, all of it live. And that's exactly the state of play we love here on the patio. Not answers, but permission to ask a better question. Then we came home to the brain, where the science is firm. You don't experience time as a stream, you experience it as filed change. Event boundaries, time cells, memory indexed by relationship rather than date. And you've got your homework, the film clip test. Count the boundaries, collect the duration guesses, see for yourself whether felt time tracks the files or the stopwatch. Run it, and tell us what you find in the comments. Genuinely, we read them, and we've built whole episodes off a single good comment before. And then, lost. The island as a structure that surfaces unresolved relationships. Desmond saved not by finding the right year, but by finding the right relation. Penny on the other end of a phone line that held both of his worlds together. Whatever happened, happened because collapse doesn't rewind. Consequences ride with you. And a finale that never resolves the timeline because the timeline was never the wound. The wound was relational, and so was the healing. Time is the receipt, friends. The relationship was the purchase. We'll leave you with the question we opened on, sharpened. When you look back on your own life this week, and you will, everybody does, notice what your memory reaches for. I'll wager it isn't dates, it's faces at boundaries. Who was there when everything changed? And if that's how the record is written, maybe it's worth asking Lily's question one more time. Is the clock the engine of your life, or just the sound the engine makes? If tonight stretched your thinking even a little, do us a kindness. Like this episode, share it with the friend who still argues about the lost finale. You know exactly who they are. And subscribe to Jackdaw Patio here on YouTube so you don't miss what's next. We're also on Substack with the full research pack behind tonight's episode, every source linked. You'll find the video on Reddit and on X, and if you'd rather have us in your ears on the morning walk, the audio podcast is on Spotify. Wherever you pull up a chair, we're glad you're on the patio. And before we go tonight, we've got one more voice, because there's somebody who's been just off the edge of this patio for every episode we've ever made. And tonight's show belonged to her before it ever belonged to us. Anne, come say goodnight.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be brief. I know how Chris feels about an outro that overstays its welcome. But I couldn't let this particular episode close without saying thank you. Lost is my show. It has been since 2004. Chris will confirm that Wednesday evenings in this house were sacred, and that he was not permitted to speak during Desmond episodes. Not a word. So to watch the four of you take the show I love and treat it this gently, not picking it apart, not explaining it away, but truly seeing it, that meant more to me than I can easily say. Lily, you brought me to tears twice this evening, and I intend to discuss that with you privately. Charlie, dear man, do answer that telephone one of these days. And Dr. Vega, the finale always made sense to me. I simply never had the language for why. Now I do. It was never about the timeline. It was about everyone finding everyone. Thank you all for finding each other out here every week, and for letting me listen in. Good night from just inside the garden door.
And that, friends, is my constant. Been holding my record together since before I knew records needed holding. Until next time, mind yours. Good night from all five of us tonight.